Again, welcome everybody to Active Brain University. My name is Bob Stewart, and today I have the just absolute pleasure of we're going to have kind of a fireside chat here, and it's going to be SEO advice you can use from a real SEO expert. And the gentleman that I have joining me today is the director of SEO for Trulia. And there are not too many sites out there on the internet that get more traffic than Trulia. And so when in the opening slide I said we have the pleasure today of being joined by a real SEO expert, whenever I do a class and I talk about SEO, I basically say these are just things that we've been learning over the years and trying to get things to rank. Mark actually gets paid for SEO, right? That's what he does. That's why I call him a real expert, and he deserves to be paid, right? Sites that end up in a position like Trulia don't get there by some stroke of luck. In fact, they're led there by men and women who know what they're doing as it relates to search engine optimization. So I'd like to bring this gentleman on the line. His name is Mark Monroe. He's the director of SEO at Trulia. Mark, how are you doing today?
Hey, I'm doing great.
Mark is fresh off. When you get paid to do SEO, you got to make sure you keep up with what's going on. So he's fresh home from a conference all last week, right, Mark, where you were there meeting with other people that get paid to do this stuff, and you guys were sharing ideas, and you were on a few panels.
Yes, I was at the FMX, which is probably the premier search engine conference, and it was really a pleasure. I was on a panel with Danny Sullivan, who leads the conference, and just spent a week talking about changes coming up from Google and impact of things that have been happening in the last couple of years. So it was a great week at that conference.
So why spend the next 60 minutes with us? Here's what we're going to do, you guys. There's a lot of misinformation. There's a lot of things you could be doing, maybe things that you think you should be doing that don't necessarily make as big of an impact as you'd hoped. We're just going to sit here and talk. I created a bunch of questions. Some of these are questions I have. Some of these are questions I would imagine you guys have. We want to try to after 60 minutes, you guys walk away from here with some things you can put into action, some advice you can take home, some things you can share with your friends, some stuff you can bounce off your SEO experts, right? You guys probably have some folks in your life that maybe know a little bit here and there. But we're just going to chat about search engine optimization and maybe how we can get better at doing this. So the first thing, let's get Mark's credentials out there. And so he's been on these panels. He's the SEO director at Trulia. Mark, give me a little bit of maybe background into your world as it relates to SEO.
Yeah, sure. I've been doing SEO for, believe it or not, about 11 years now, since around 2003. I've worked on some extremely large sites, including Everyday Health, WhatToExpect.com, Merchant Circle, Wine.com, Sidestep, which later got integrated into Kayak. So I've been doing it a long time. I've seen a lot of changes over the years as well.
And I think as far as credentials go, for me, when I look at somebody as an SEO, like I want to see those big sites, right? And you mentioned some sites that get tons of traffic, but I like to know that somebody has taken a site and moved the needle on it, essentially, right? I mean, do you feel like in your history of doing SEO, you've been able to move the needle on some of these sites?
Oh, absolutely. And one of the things I'm most proud of is taking sites from launch to multi-million visits, and that happened with Merchant Circle and Sidestep specifically.
Awesome. Okay, so you got some credentials. I mean, the people at Trulia, and I've gotten to know the folks at Trulia a lot more in the last 6 or 8 months since we've become an activated market leader, become a part of the Trulia family. One of the things I do know about those guys is SEO it's always on their mind, right? It's always on your guys' mind. And so if Trulia has made you their director of SEO, you've obviously done some things because they want to get in front of as many consumers as possible. So so let's get that out of the way. I think Mark's qualified to come here and be, as I proclaimed him, an SEO expert and talk a little bit about this stuff. So, okay, just let's step back, maybe a little broad overview kind of before we get started. How is SEO changing, let's say in the last 5 years? Because obviously there's been massive changes in the last 10 or 11 years, and even in the last year or two, there's been some, just in the last 5 years, like what are some of the things that you really think have changed in the SEO world that if the casual observer might not necessarily be aware of?
Sure. Yeah, the big changes really started about four years ago or so, and previous to that, you could generate a lot of traffic just by spewing out a lot of content and trading links with people, and Google reacted to that and felt that there's a lot of websites making in the results that didn't really provide a quality user experience. So they started off with some of the people out here might have heard of the Panda update a few years ago, and Panda update was really about quality. And you might hear people talk about quality content, but it's not just content, it's a quality user experience. If you think like Google, what Google wants is when someone does a search, they have a question, and the website has to give the answer. So sites that don't give the answer, either because the content isn't there, or because the user doesn't trust the content, or because the answer is obscure because there's too many ads. All those things have led to changes in the search engine. So quality content, quality user experience, rewarding sites that do that is probably the first thing. The other big change has been in link building, and most of the techniques, there was a lot of techniques that was used up until a couple of years ago that was very successful, trading links, buying links. Those techniques really worked against what Google was trying to achieve, because links were meant to be an endorsement, and an endorsement and a recommendation, and that shouldn't be paid for and shouldn't be bargained for. It should just happen. So a lot of the old techniques that were used to improve the popularity of a website, and which would lead to SEO success, have now been downgraded, and a lot of sites have been penalized by Google from what people may, what's referred to as the penguin algorithm. So link building has changed a lot as well, and what works now is more getting links that are based on value and creating an earned reputation. I'll talk a little bit more about link building later.
Mark, give me, like, when you say quality, right? And Panda was really focused a lot on quality. Is there, like, can you think of something that maybe like real estate agents were doing before that might have been working that now just doesn't work? Like, here, I'll give you an example. So, like for me, I used to see a lot of people who would find something that would work for them. Maybe they were writing about, a 3-story house in Phoenix or something, and then they would take like that same piece of content and they would just swap out the word 3-story house in Phoenix for 3-story house in Tempe, and then 3-story house in Tucson, and it would essentially be just repeating the same piece of content and just changing the keywords. 4 years ago, that might have worked, right? They might have been able to get a couple different results in. Today, that kind of thing doesn't work, right? I mean, that's what you're talking about with just this thin kind of content where you just swap out some keywords here and there. I mean, those kinds of things have essentially been eliminated from the search engine results, right?
That's correct, and the reason I believe is it's going to lack trust. It's going to smack of something that's just been pasted together, and if the user doesn't trust it, they're going to bounce back to Google and select the result that they do trust. And that's one of the signals I believe Google is looking at, and mainly what Panda is about is user behavior that bad quality content or content or bad quality content or bad user experience leads the user to go back to Google and find a result that they do like. Another example would be you have a great article, so you have a title, how to best schools in some neighborhood, and you have a great article, but the article is buried below the fold, and all the user can see when they land on the page is a lead form. So that's kind of bait and switch. User lands on the page, can't find the thing they were looking for when they did the search, so they're going to bounce back. So sometimes you can have good content, but that content can be obscured by a poor user experience.
So there's lots of changes have been happening, and the reality is, Google doesn't send you or I or anybody out there an email and say, hey, Mark, we changed this. I mean, this is all stuff that we're trying to piece together kind of based on some of the loose stuff that a guy like Matt Cutts might say, or just really what you're seeing in your own sites that you're working on and how you can react and change, right? I mean, we're not like, you haven't been sent an email by Google saying this is what's changed.
That's for the most part true. And in some cases, Google is a little more straightforward. I think it depends whether they think people can take advantage of the knowledge that they give away. So, for instance, they have an algorithm which has been called the page layout algorithm, which if there's too many ads above the fold, you will get hit with that algorithm and get a sudden drop in traffic. And Google's been straightforward about that one. Panda they've been vague about, and I think it's because it's, and what I heard actually from inside of Google, that it's behavior driven, and I think they're afraid that if it's behavior driven that people can hire people to make them get fake good metrics, so they've been a little bit more secretive about that one. So I think a lot of times it depends on whether or not they think it can be gamed. If they think it can be gamed, they're going to be extremely vague.
So speaking of being gamed, okay, so you've got elements of search engine optimization that really take place with any piece of or any type of content that we might create. And so we've got a piece of content, and when we create that piece of content, we create it on the internet on a page, right? Whether that be a page on our website or a page on our blog. So how important are some of the on-page elements of SEO? Are those things still important? Things like, you know, the keywords or the title header or the meta tags or these kind of things that happen on the page. How important are these things fundamentally still to ranking well?
So they're still important, specifically the ones that are visible. So your headings, your title. If you look at a page, Google's essentially looking at a page to trying to determine what it's about, and it's going to reach a conclusion based on what appears to be the most important content on the page. So anything that's closer to the top is more likely to be what it's about. Anything that's in the title, the page title, is still extremely important with SEO. So it's important. It's not going to differentiate you because they have such a big index. It's just the starting point. The starting point is for Google to figure out what the page is about, and that's what the content is going to do. And then what's going to differentiate you is having a strong domain and having a strong page. But it starts with content on the page. What doesn't matter, and it's on my list to mention later, but I'll bring it up now since you brought it up, is meta keywords do not impact rankings and haven't for a long time. In Google for probably 10 years, and since when Bing took over Yahoo's search, that was the end of meta keywords. Meta description does not impact ranking, but can impact click-through because that's what the user sees in the search results, and that's your opportunities to communicate a message about the page to help convince people to click through.
How much focus would you put on like page layout in terms of just, I guess, like you talked a little bit about, you know, having like ads above the fold, a bunch of ads above the fold, or having like you know, a big lead capture form above the fold. But just in terms of the spacing on the page, you know, the professional look of the page, do you think those things play a factor in terms of what Google sees?
Well, I think some directly and some indirectly. So if a page, there's the trust factor. So if a page just doesn't look good and looks either like a 1999 design or does not look professional, then the user is just liable to bounce right back and say, I'm going to go to a site that I trust. When Google did the Panda algorithm, there was a bunch of questions that they asked people, which I don't know if these questions are worked into the algorithm, but I think they correlated it with sites that had bad metrics, and that included things like, would you use a credit card on this site? Would you trust this site? So the look is important to trust to get people to stay on the site. And then the layout should promote the content that brought the user into the site. And so layout, you know, does play a role.
So it plays a role in terms of the actual user getting there and whether they decide to dive into the content, which would be a positive signal to Google, right? Hey, this person spent 3 minutes and 5 minutes or whatever on this page, versus they land there, they go, ooh, this just doesn't feel right, and they bounce out of there right away, which would be a negative signal back to the search engine.
Right, and then also content that's visible to users, Google will consider it to be more important. If it's invisible, if it's below the fold, if it's way down on the page, it's less likely that you'll be able to rank for that content. It might be supportive. It doesn't mean you don't want to have that content. You might get some long tail queries, and it might support the content up above the fold. But if that's the only place your important content is, it's not going to work.
So before we started here, you said, hey, I know you got this one slide where you're going to ask for one important change that I can make to my website, but I've got a number of them. And is that all right, or should we change this? I said, hey, man, let's give them as much as we can. So if I'm an agent, I'm sitting there today, I've got a little bit of time today to work on my site. Maybe I set aside a little bit of time each week to work on my site. What is one change I could make today? And then give me a couple of changes that I might be able to make on my website as an agent that would have an impact on my search engine rankings.
So one thing I like to do on every site I work on is create a path to every piece of content on your site that's as flat as possible. That always seems to help. And what I mean by that is take a look at your home page and figure out how many clicks it's going to take Google to get to every piece of content on your site, and try and come up with an architecture that minimizes those amounts of clicks. Without going into the PageRank algorithm in detail, what happens is the further you are away from the home page, the weaker a page is going to be. So try and come up with a flat way. And sometimes you can do that by creating an HTML sitemap. But the main thing is reduce the number of clicks it takes for Google to get to any pages on your site. So that's one. The other thing I would do is a lot of cross-linking between related content. So if you have neighborhood pages, link to the other neighborhoods. If you have listings, link to other listings. That will both help you get indexed, and it also make Google think all the pages are more important because they're getting referenced on your own site. Any questions on that, or should I keep going?
No, I mean, that's a good, that's a really good piece of advice. And I think if a lot of us were to look at pages on our website, or even like blog posts that you've written, linking to other related content, I mean, that's a big deal, right? And it makes sense. Even I always look at Google like a real person, right? And because they're getting so much closer to actually being a real person, right? And so if a real person landed on a piece of content that I'd written, it would make sense for me to try to get them to other related content when they were finished consuming the piece of content that they'd originally started with, right? I mean, just
right.
as a person, that makes sense to me. Like, hey, give me some other stuff you've written about this. Show me some other listings that relate to this. So that absolutely makes sense. I don't think I have a question about that.
And try and make the link, if it's pointing to important content, so in-content links would be better as opposed to just kind of little lists, which still make sense. But what Google got a patent a couple of years ago, and no one knows for sure whether they started using it. But basically, what the patent says is they're going to value a link. They're going to assign value to a link based on the likelihood that a user might click it. So as opposed to the early days when all links were kind of valued equally. So you want a link to the content, and you don't want them just, again, at the footer and the bottom of the page. You want them to have some likelihood of being clicked, which means you also want it to be relevant too. Otherwise, it's messing up your page. So.
Okay, so if even in the body of my content, if in a certain paragraph I'm talking about something that I've written about previously, it behooves me to link to that other piece of content. Right,
and like WordPress has a plugin that will find related content and put it in the side rail and link to 5 pieces. They've got that in several. For instance, if you have a WordPress blog, they have several plugins that do that. But if you can get in-content links, is better, and also more likely that people will click on them and continue to get additional page views on your site.
So I think those are just, if I wanted to sit down today, two things I could do is, one, I could try to flatten out my website in terms of making it easier for people to find the content, and how many clicks away from the homepage does my content end up being, all of my content. The second thing would be adding links to relevant content on pages where it makes sense. I think maybe we'll have some questions about those when we bring folks on a little bit later. So you've talked a bunch about links. That, I guess, first, are they still important? I mean, they are, right?
Links, yes.
Yeah.
Links is still what drives. It's still what drives Google's algorithm. It's a differentiator. It's what builds your reputation, and links are still important. It's just getting them is different than it used to be, and harder. So I like to say, create reasons to be linked to. Create content that, you know, all you guys out there are local, so create local content that other local sites would be interested in linking to. Create something that when someone else links to it, it makes them a better page by referencing you. So that's the way I would do it, and I think it's a lot now about building relationships, getting to know people, another website, telling them what you have, telling them why it makes sense to link to you. It's harder to link, but if you work at it, it's also easy to differentiate against your other local competition, because not everyone's going to put in the hard work.
Let me, I mean, just if I'm a real estate agent, like, it just seems like the idea of going out and building relationships and you know, sharing my content with, like, that, it maybe seemed a little bit challenging. Like, do you have some advice? Like, is it just a matter of going to some other local bloggers and, like, commenting quite a bit on their stuff, or would you, like, take an opportunity to offline contact them and say, hey, I've got some great content? Or would it be a matter of, like, maybe if it really, really fits in a discussion in the thread of one of their posts, you would link to your own content out of that to help them discover who you are? I mean, what is the process of building a relationship with, like, another local blogger look like to you?
I think it's, I mean, I don't think there's one single strategy. I think you mentioned a couple that are good, which is commenting on the blog and getting to know them. Also, any local organizations or groups, just calling them up on the phone. You know, your local library might want to have a link to local homes for sale on their website. And I find getting on the phone actually helps right now, and
or is this
as well
something
as
that an agent can
content that people find useful?
This is something an agent can maybe even do at, like, a networking event they went to or something, where they've met a local accountant and they're in the process of talking to them, saying, hey, you know, I mean, I think in some ways, does that become like link exchanging? Like, do you offer a link exchange when we know that Google has maybe devalued the idea of exchanging links? I mean, is there still any value in, you know, talking to the local accountant at the networking meeting?
I think the old-fashioned link exchanges where someone had a resource page, here's a list of great links, and I have a list of great links, and I'll link to you and you link to me. That's specifically the links that Google would be devaluing. I think it's okay to, well, try and get one-way links, but also do a link exchange as long as they're in content and relevant. And that was the problem with those old resource pages, that a lot of times they were just a list of links that weren't relevant. So try and get them in content, try and make them relevant, and try and make sure there's always a good reason for that link to be there on both sides.
What tool do you use, Mark, to see where your links are coming from? Who is linking to you?
I use Moz, Open Site Explorer.
Okay.
And
so that used to be, they used to call themselves.
Money. You can also use Webmaster Tools. Google's Webmaster Tools. It's not exhaustive, but it's free. But if you want to look at who's linking to your competitor's site, then you need a tool like Moz.
Okay.
It used to be SEO Moz.
Right. What is the importance of the anchor text these days? Like, I know at one point it would have made sense that where most of your anchor text pointing back to a page was like the same, right? It was homes for sale in Kirkland, and then it became where they wanted this more kind of natural link profile in that, you know, if every link back to your page said homes for sale in Kirkland, that was probably not the way that people would naturally link to you, and that might be an indicator you were paying for or doing a link exchange. When I'm getting backlinks, do I just let the person linking to me use whatever they want? Do I try to guide them to use, you know, anchor text that's something specific? Or what do you think about anchor text on backlinks?
Yeah, so anchor text had always been the single most dominating part of Google's algorithm, and therefore it became the most abused part of Google's algorithm.
Sure.
And basically every site that I've seen that's been hit by a penguin penalty has been extreme anchor text optimization. Even looks like Expedia had been hit, and it seems like what they were doing was distributing a blog template that had their keywords in every template that was published. So what I would say with anchor text is be really careful. Ask users to link with that, ask them to give you a descriptive link, what they think makes sense. And then maybe occasionally, maybe 1 out of every 10 times, ask for the keyword that you'd like to rank for that page, but not more than that.
Interesting. All right.
And I think if they're determining what to link with, then it can't help but look organic.
Right. It becomes
That's
that
the thing I'm
link.
most afraid of when it comes to penalties right now.
Really is the overuse of a certain keyword phrase in links coming back to your site?
Right, especially a money phrase, especially
Okay.
you know, mortgage calculator, especially a phrase that people spend a lot of money on to buy traffic.
Got it. Okay, social signals. So I don't know what it was, 3 years ago maybe, you start to get the inklings of social signals, right? Like likes and retweets and these things out there where real people are sharing content in a social capacity, and it can be used as an indicator of what is actually valuable content. And I think at some point in the SEO world there became just this real fervor over, oh, social signals are going to be the future of SEO. In terms of, let's say we're 3 or 4 years from that now, how big of an impact or how big of a role are social signals playing in SEO?
Yeah, there's a lot of confusion here because social shares correlate very, very highly to strong rankings in the search engines, and there's been lots of correlation studies. But what everybody has to remember is correlation does not equal causation. And to be honest, I think specifically Mark Monroe's opinion, I think a lot of consultants have jumped on this because it's, you know, something else for them to consult on that's interesting. Google has come out and made very strong repeated statements that they're not using Facebook shares and likes as a signal, and I don't think they would.
And I mean, more so, Mark, could they even? Right, because
well, they can't. They can only read public pages. There are some links. The links are no followed, and I don't think it would ever be in their interest to have their algorithm dependent on one single company, especially a competitor's algorithm. And they'd also have to. It would have to be very consistent. It would have to be a very consistent signal that couldn't be gamed, and you know, it'd be very hard for them to control that. Someone who I respect made a very good point about correlation, and he also did some studies on Google Plus, which I'll talk about in a second. And he made the point that's true that swimming or the beach is, drowning is very highly correlated with ice cream. And the reason, and that seems silly, but it's true, when people are eating a lot of ice cream, they tend to drown more. And that's because it's hot, and people go swimming more in the summer, and they eat ice cream more in the summer, but there's no causation there. So I think it makes a lot of sense to create content that gets shared. If it gets shared, it's more likely to generate links. It's more likely good content. I think that's one of the things that's going on here when people see the correlations. Good content gets shared. Good content gets links. If content's getting shared, it's a good signal about that piece of content. It means it's likely to get links. And also the sharing is liable lead to links. I've seen that happen. You post something, it gets distributed it gets retweeted on Twitter, and that's going to get you links. So that will get you links indirectly. So it is a good idea, but only if it's valid. It's getting shared for valid reasons, not being forced, not being spammed, and then it'll indirectly lead you to links.
Let me ask you this, because I guess social signals to me is like the idea that if my content gets shared, let's say it gets shared on Facebook, and even in my little circle it catches fire, and 5 of my friends share it, and that leads to 25 or 30 of my friends going to this article or this piece of content that I've written and spending the 3 minutes on the page that it takes to read that article. Is having those visitors to the page, is that a positive signal back to the search engine? Like, forget the fact that it was shared, just the fact that because of it being shared, 25 people landed on it, where had it not been, those 25 wouldn't, and they all spent 3 minutes consuming the piece of content. Like, could that be a reason why?
I think only if they're finding it from search. So Google, what the search engines care about is delivering good content from search. So if they're clicking on it, that itself is most likely not a signal. But if they're searching for it, and people do search for article titles, they're likely to have a higher click-through rate. And I think click-through rate on Google is a signal. If people click through more than average, that is a positive signal. So I think that's part of it. Now one more thing. One thing about Google Plus is when you share on Google Plus, it's likely to be indexed very quickly, probably within 24 hours at a minimum, and maybe within 6 hours. So it certainly makes sense to share new content on Google to get it indexed very quickly. Getting indexed very quickly means you could jump ahead of your competition on a new listing or something like that. So it also gets you a link back from Google. Somebody presented a study at SMX which seemed to indicate that a pretty good study, that they don't seem to be assigning value to those links. But certainly, it's hard to tell for sure, but certainly from this study, it doesn't seem like those links are actually giving you a boost, even though they are from Google. But certainly gets you indexed, and getting in the index really quickly is important. And then just Google Plus is so important to Google that I think it makes sense to play, even if it doesn't seem like it's getting a lot of use right now.
Which leads us to Google authorship. So, I mean, even some part of Google authorship relates to Google Plus, and the idea that they want us over there using that. I'll put my quote fingers up. That social network. Talk to me for a second about what you think about Google authorship.
So you certainly want to have any content you create to be associated with your Google account, because it'll show you your picture in the search results, for one thing, which is going to help click-through, not rankings, but click-through. You'll get more traffic because of that. Google has said that at some time in the future, they're going to start calculating author rank, and that authors who have a good reputation will, in fact, rank better. They have not implemented that, from what I've heard, except for a very, very small number of authors with an extremely positive reputation. So I would not consider it a factor yet. They said it will be. I think they're trying to figure out how to do it, again, in a way that's not gameable, because that's what they're always worried about. So not yet a factor. I believe they very strongly want it to be a factor. So I think it's a good time to start creating your authorship, your Google account, anything you write, associating it with your Google account, and it might start helping you sometime in the future.
So do you think there's, like you're saying right now, it's not a factor in the rankings. Is there any benefit to being ahead of the game on something like this?
Well, because they said that they said that it will be in the future. So being ahead of the game means as soon as they start using it, you're one step ahead of everybody else who waited for it to become a factor.
What part of this is like the most important concept? Like for me, when I look at this, I think of Google authorship, and you called it agent or author rank. I don't know, I've used the term author authority, but what part, like what's the concept in there? To me, it becomes like Google looking out in the real world and trying to like verify me in the real world, right? Like if I got cited in a newspaper, that's something I'd want to try to show to Google as my expertise as a real estate expert, you know, having been cited by the Seattle Times. Or if I've got a bunch of videos where I'm in there explaining certain prospects of the real estate transaction, and I've kind of shown this to Google through my Google profile as, hey, this is just trying to give them that full idea of my expertise in whatever subject matter I'm choosing to write about. Like, is that the concept that authorship allows Google to understand, like, what I'm an expert in?
Yeah, I think this is really just an extension of the PageRank algorithm. The PageRank algorithm, what separated Google and what worked really well for them was all about reputation. Links provided reputation. So they're now essentially trying to do the same thing with Google authorship. Trying, as authors build reputations, that means they're more worthwhile content. People will be happier with the content. It's going to be a better result to show their users. So it's just extending what's worked for them in the past to people as opposed to websites.
So, and I think as a part of that, like so the question is, how can an agent compete with the Trulias of the world? These, you know, the big sites that have millions of pages. They've got the resources to be able to pay guys like you to figure this stuff out and to really always have an eye on what's going on. To me, authorship maybe starts to kind of level that playing field, right? Because a site like Trulia, they're being recognized for the authority of the domain and how much, you know, the millions of pages of content you guys have that's unique. How does an agent compete with the Trulias of the world?
Yeah, so your first point there, I think, is a good point, that creating a strong author profile could easily put individual authors on equal footing for blog posts anyway and specific content. And it's, as far as how to compete with the Trulias and others of the world, it's certainly gotten a lot harder, of course, as big companies have learned about SEO, and as when you're first getting started, it's a lot harder to get links than it used to be and build your reputation. So it's gotten harder. But I think it really comes into long tail, going after very specific local keywords, local things that the individual agents here know about their community that Trulia or the Z company never would. And you know, like a blog post about finding homes in a specific school district or something specific to that locale, really long tail, specific local content, as well as also getting into Google Local, because that can give you a spot that Trulia cannot show up in. And then so I think it comes down to, you know, knowing local better and finding long tail. One of the tools I like to use when I'm looking for very specific things to write about to try and get traffic is something that's called Uber Suggest, and it basically uses Google Suggest, but it expands it out quite a bit to every various key combinations. Let me check the spelling on that. And you can put your city name in there or whatever keyword in there, and it'll find really long tail stuff and give you ideas of what people are searching for.
So say that again, Mark. It's Uber Suggest, like UBER Suggest.com?
Yeah, just a second. I'm checking the, yeah, okay. That's it. UBERSUGGEST.org. And okay. It basically scrapes Google Suggest. You give it a query, and it'll give you variations for A through Z for that query. So if you use it, you'll see what I mean. And it can give you really good ideas of coming up with really specific pieces of content that you can rank for.
Yeah, I love your answer, by the way. So we call it hyperlocal, or here at Active Brain, and we try to, I mean, a lot of the stuff that we talk about when I do our blogging boot camp classes is about that sort of thing, right? Getting very hyper local, writing about those real specific components of your marketplace that the big boys just don't cover.
Right, and also things that are specific to things that are happening right now in your community. You know, a big issue right now, this month, something that's time-based, was again something we would never get on our site.
Mark, is there still this big pool of long tail traffic to be had? I mean, are people still, I guess as time's gone on, have people gotten more specific in the way they query, or do you think they've generally gotten less specific?
They've gotten more specific, and actually one of the big changes that's happening is, which hasn't made a big impact yet, is Hummingbird, which was an update they did last year, which is going to be more towards natural language search. And what Google is really pushing is through their iPhone and Android apps is the natural language queries, where people can speak their queries. And that's really going to lead to more questions, very more specific types of searches. The long tail is still there. People are getting more specific.
Does that bode well for an agent focusing on the long tail then? I mean, it seems like it would.
It should, yes. Yes, because they should have answers for more of those specific questions. And more, what Google's trying to get better at now is understanding what an entire page is about. So as opposed to just the keywords on the page, and a blog post that's very specific about a neighborhood or a city, and might also have homes for sale in it, but is more specific, might have a better chance of ranking than, say, Trulia's San Francisco page, which might have some keywords on there, but really isn't about that question. They're trying to get away from keywords to truly understanding users' intent when they do a search. It hasn't really made it too much into the regular search algorithm yet. It's showing up with the vocal search, the spoken search.
Got it. All right, so today is St. Patrick's Day. Let's talk about a couple of common SEO myths. What are some of the more common myths that you run across out there as they relate to SEO? I don't care if it's one or two. It doesn't have to be three.
I got a couple. So
okay.
One is XML sitemaps. Creating an XML sitemap, which is not the sitemap that the user sees, but a sitemap that's generated for the spider, will not get you ranked. It doesn't replace having a clickable path into your content. I've seen this mistake a lot where people say, well, I've got it in my sitemap. No, that's not going to do it. You have to make sure there's a click path. It's the clicks, it's the links that tell Google a piece of content is valuable. So XML sitemap is not going to be your answer. I already mentioned meta tags, but I'll repeat it. They don't impact rankings. And you should still have an HTML sitemap, even if you have an XML sitemap. And another myth is that there's some sort of specific keyword density that you're shooting for. There's not. You don't want to repeat the keyword 6.7% of the time. You want to repeat it. You want it to look and seem natural, and you want to get varied language on the page. So it's a few myths.
All right. SEO strategies are a waste of time. So I'm here. I'm going to start working on my website. I've heard from all these experts. There's all these different things I can do. Which one of them is just a waste of time, in your opinion?
Well, a couple of old ones, things that don't work. So exact match keyword domains. Google started downplaying those several years ago. So new-homes-for-sale in county whatever, that doesn't work anymore. There's still some advantage to having keywords in your main domain, because you'll usually get links to your brand, but you're not going to get a boost just because you have the keywords in your domain. They've downplayed that to a large degree, as well as creating lots of domains and interlinking them. That was a strategy that you don't want to do anymore. It's hard enough to build up the reputation of a single domain let alone multiple domains.
Hold on. Talk to me for a second, Mark. Talk to me for a second about that concept of a single domain. Like, because I've always believed we have a thing called outside blogs where I would encourage somebody who's like creating a blog on their own domain that's not a part of ActiveBrain, that they should focus on like a particular area as opposed to the 5 areas that they might do business. From an SEO perspective, like I believe they should just be focused on one. What do you, like if I had one site, does it make sense for me to have that site try to be about 5 different cities that I do business in, or should that one site be focused on like one city that I do business in and really try to build up credibility for one place as opposed to 5?
No, I would, if you're working with 5 cities, I would have a single domain because the overall domain reputation is going to be based on linking root domains. I mean, there's lots of things that go into Google's algorithm, but you're going to have, let's say you have one domain with 100 other domains linking to it as opposed to having 5 with 20 each. That one with 100 is going to tend to rank better. So it's hard to build a strong domain. It's hard to get links these days. I would focus on building a single strong domain.
But would you focus on building it for 5 different cities or for one? Because I think about like a real estate agent in general and just the business of being an agent and the idea that folks that find a niche in the long run tend to have more successful businesses, right? Like they say, I'm going to be the condo expert in Seattle. Like, sure, I might sell houses in Seattle, sell single-family houses. I might even sell a condo over in Bellevue every now and then. I might sell a house up in Redmond. But from my business, right, like I'm the Seattle condo expert. So from my website, does it make sense for me to focus my website on Seattle condos as opposed to focusing it on condos in Seattle and condos in Bellevue and condos in Kirkland and condos in Redmond? Like, is there any, would I end up better in the long run if I have a tighter focus on what I want to rank for?
Yeah, I think that's a question where there's probably no absolute answer because it depends on the business. If a business is really split between 5 cities, and then I would probably want to have content for all those 5 cities. I certainly wouldn't want to create 5 domains for the reasons that I mentioned. Mm-hmm. I do, though, on the other hand, from a branding perspective, I think it's good to have a niche and really dominate in the niche, but you might want to expand out into other niches. So there's probably no perfect answer to that. But if you're going after 5 cities, if you want to have like one particular focus for your homepage, because that's your main one, then I would do that. But I would still get content, of course, for the other cities that you're working.
Got it. All right. So I always get this question, like, is it okay if I put my content on my ActiveBrain blog and my WordPress blog? And we didn't talk in advance on what your answer was going to be for this, but what do you think about that? Like, does the search engine wipe me out because I decide to place something I've written on my own blog and then I put it out on ActiveBrain, or I put it on the Trulia blog or something like that? What do you feel about duplicate content?
Yeah, just before I'll just mention one other thing that's a waste of time is don't sign up for any services to promise to get you indexed and charge a monthly fee for that. That's a complete waste of money. Google finds sites by crawling, not by anyone submitting them to Google. So if you ever see any of those from your ISP, don't ever sign up for anything like that.
There you go. That'll save you $100 this year.
Definitely wanted to mention that one. So that's a really good question. I've been actually thinking about that question for myself because I've posted content on LinkedIn and trying to figure out whether to duplicate it myself on my own blog. And it's kind of the same thing. I get more visibility on LinkedIn, but it's my content. So I want it on my blog as well, and that's kind of where I'm leaning. I think you're not going to get. I don't think you'll get penalized. You're not going to get penalized. Google may make a decision to show one or the other, and they may show both. If the ActiveBrain page is stronger, they'll probably show the ActiveBrain page. If your blog page is stronger, because you've been able to get links to that specific article, they'll probably show that one.
But this myth that I think is out there that, oh, if you put duplicate content up, you're going to get penalized and it's going to hurt you. Like, I mean, I tend to agree with you. I don't necessarily believe that.
I mean, I've heard Matt Cutts from Google say several times, There's very few duplicate content penalties. You're not going to be penalized. If you put up 2 duplicate sites, yes, you may get penalized. You're taking, and I've seen that happen. But the same article posted in a couple of different places, I'm not concerned about that. It's giving you, Google may or may not show both of them. They'll probably show whichever one they think is stronger. Might actually give you more of an opportunity because they're going to say, in some cases, the one on Active Rain might be stronger, and in other cases, the one on your blog might be stronger because it got distributed and got some links. So
here's what I say, though, to folks that ask me this question. I say, if possible, you should have Google authorship set up in any of the arenas that you are choosing to share this. So if you can get Google authorship, that way Google knows, hey, look, I'm the same author. I just happen to place this in 2 different spots. I mean, I think that duplicate content would be, because it comes from the Matt Cutts team. He's the guy that talks about it. They're the web spam team. So for me, duplicate content would be trying to eliminate like a site that goes out there. They pull RSS feeds from a bunch of different sites, and they're now pulling together a site with content that none of it is theirs, right? It's all from different authors out there. I mean, that's what they're trying to eliminate with duplicate content, don't you think?
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and yes, good point on the authorship. Make sure Google understands that both pieces of content are associated with the same author.
Okay.
And they'll decide which one to show. They're not going to penalize either one.
Right. All right. So we got about 7 minutes here on Mark's schedule that we can finish with some questions from you guys. And wow, there's a bunch of questions in here, and I see that you guys found the questionnaire. If you have a question right now, you can find your GoToWebinar control panel somewhere there on your desktop and pull those out. So let me come back here, and we're going to get a couple of questions. Let's give them the site that you use to generate like other queries and other long tail keyword phrases was ubersuggest.com, and I'll just write it up here for you guys.
.org.
.org. Ubersuggest.org is that website that Mark mentioned earlier, where you can go and type in a phrase, and it'll give you a bunch of other kind of related long tail keyword phrases.
Right, and it does it by scraping Google Suggest, the drop down in the box. So if you give it a word, homes for sale Sacramento, it'll then add an A onto it, a B, every letter of the alphabet, and then give you all the suggests that come through for all those variations. Very cool tool.
Ellen says, go ahead, Mark.
And free, I was going to say. But.
Ooh, there you go. Nobody ever got mad at that.
Occasionally it doesn't work. So if it doesn't work right now for some reason, just go back and try again.
That's what you get for free, by the way. All right. Ellen says, does Google offer SEO services? They don't,
no.
Right? I mean, no. So if you ever get a call from somebody saying they work with Google and they're here to give you SEO advice and services, like that is not true, right?
That's not true.
Be careful. As real estate agents, I think you guys get those kind of calls a lot. People realize there's a high value on being ranked high in the search engine results. As a real estate agent, you're absolutely going to get calls from people saying stuff like, we work with Google. It's BS. How about, well, so Eddie asked, and he's probably not the only person out there with this question, how does one add Google authorship to your content? The best answer I have for that, Eddie, is Google, adding Google authorship to my website, or if you have like a WordPress site, Google adding Google authorship to my WordPress site. The easiest way to get authorship added to your content is if you have an email address at the domain that you're creating content on. So if my website was bobstewart.com and I had an email address, bob@bobstewart.com, there's a real simple way to get authorship set up in that regard. If you don't have an email on that domain, then it becomes a little bit more challenging, but it's not undoable. It essentially becomes taking a piece of code and placing it, it's a link to your Google Plus profile. There's just a little process, but I would just encourage you, Eddie, just Google setting up Google authorship on my website. You're going to get a page from Google that walks you through how to do that depending on what kind of a website you have. If it's Active Rain you're talking about, go ahead.
And WordPress has a simple plugin, so if you happen to have a WordPress blog, it's really easy to you just install and set up the plugin.
Mark, what do you think about YouTube as it relates to SEO? like, and I guess there would be a couple. Linda says, hey, can you talk a little bit about the SEO and the value of YouTube? What do you think about YouTube in general?
It gives you another place for you to show up. So if you have videos and you submit them to YouTube, then Google will often bring a video and integrate it into the results.
What about from the perspective of taking a YouTube video and placing it into a piece of content? Is there any value in that?
In placing it on your page?
Sure.
Well, Google will use a video snippet, but it has to actually, I've been looking at this recently, it has to be an embedded video, so which actually gives you like a little more click-through space. You'll see like a little picture of the video on the left of your listing if you show up in the result. But YouTube won't do it. It's got to be a video embedded on your page.
Wait, so it can't be a YouTube video embedded on your page, you're saying?
Right. I have yet to see, I mean, I'm not saying that definitively, and I'll let you know if I find that that's not the case, but I've yet to see a case of Google show a YouTube video next to a listing when a YouTube video is on the page. So I'm not saying this is for sure. I've been looking at this the last couple of days, and I have yet to see it show up. They still might show a video up in the, sometimes they have multiple indexes. So when you do a search, they might pull a video up and give you an extra position in the results. That'll click over to YouTube. But as far as the click over to your site and a little image link of the video, YouTube doesn't seem to be successful in doing that.
I always look at, well, no, I mean, there's some component of it that's, when we talked about a little bit earlier, is when somebody does the query and they actually click your result and now they're on the page. Like, we can send a positive signal back if they spend a bunch of time on that page, and part of that could be that we've got some good kind of multimedia in there. We've got a video in there that they that might cause them to spend 2 or 3 minutes watching the video. And they,
I mean, anything that improves the page and time on site is a good thing. So probably what's called a short click is a negative signal, which is a very, very, very fast return to Google, 10 seconds, and a long click, which is a very slow return to Google or no return at all, is a positive signal. So the more you engage the user, the better it is. Yeah, so from that perspective, yes.
And the other, I mean, and like you mentioned, YouTube videos will show up in Google queries, which is a great reason to use video, right? I mean, I look at a lot of like...
At the end of the video, they know how to get to you too, of course.
Right. So you turn off things like show other related videos that aren't yours. Like there's all these little kind of things that we should be doing. Linda, I mean, I think YouTube, I don't know if this is still true today, but they're like the second largest search engine behind Google. So YouTube's getting the second most number of queries every day on their site of any other site in the world. So, there's...
And the other thing is if you create a strong YouTube channel, which you can, then you link back to your website, so that will both drive some traffic and also pass page rank, right, which is good for your site as well.
What do you think about, this is a great question, what do you think about like recommendations or testimonials or ratings as they relate to, like, to SEO, I don't think they're going to relate, but as Google authorship becomes more important and like your Google author profile becomes more important, like how do ratings and rankings and reviews and testimonials kind of fit into that equation? And that's a theory question, I guess, more than anything. I don't know that we have any evidence.
You mean when it comes to your...
like, okay, so for me, I would look at it like this. When it comes to my author profile, right, like how Google views me as an expert, do you think that having a bunch of great testimonials kind of wrapped into my Google Plus or into my local pages, or is that going to help me just overall?
Well, Google reputation has always been more about what other people say about you than what you say about yourself. So I think that's how it is with links, right? Your own links, internal links, don't count as much as an external link. Somehow that'll work its way into author rank. So it's building a reputation, sure, having the world think you're good for whatever reasons that makes sense. That'll probably correlate in one or way or another to something that Google's doing to figure out your reputation.
So we're 2 minutes past. Can you stay around for a couple more minutes? There's some other really great questions here. Okay, cool. I want to be mindful of your time because I really appreciate this guy. I mean, literally, I believe Mark is an SEO expert, right? Like, he's a guy that all day long, all he does is SEO. So I just really appreciate you having you here. What are your thoughts on curated content? So I guess first off, look, curated content. So an agent goes out there and maybe they find a couple, 10 different articles, and they take some content from each of those articles and put it together, and now they've got this piece of curated content that's maybe the 5 best houses in Seattle. I don't know. I mean, that would be my thought on curated content and what that kind of looks like. But what do you think about curated content? Basically pulling together other pieces of content and making it a more presentable piece of content on your own site.
I think that's fine. It should be, it should seem and be authentic. So whether you found five most luxurious houses, and most of it, just make sure that it has something authentic about it.
Okay.
Just take things together.
So figure out put your own spin on it, basically. Make sure there's some
Exactly.
content that you've written in there that's unique and a reason for Google to even look at this thing and not just see it as a compilation of 5 other pages.
Right.
Randy says, and this is a valid question, I mean, when we talk about search engine optimization, and I do this in my classes absolutely to a fault, I think maybe, we always talk about Google, right? Like, do these same concepts apply to the Bings and the Yahoos of the world, or should we be thinking slightly different for those other places?
Yeah, it's interesting. At the conference last week, somebody asked, because everybody talks about Google, everybody says, okay, who does things specifically for Bing and Yahoo? And about, out of 300 people, about 6 people raised their hands. Basically, what we do for Google is going to work for Bing. Bing and Yahoo. There's really just one other search engine, which is Bing. Bing powers Yahoo now. Bing does not crawl as deeply as Google, and for smaller sites, sometimes they have a tough time getting them to crawl. I think they have a higher threshold in terms of link strength that you need to cross before Bing starts crawling you. I still pay attention to Bing. I don't do things specifically for Bing except look at my Webmaster Tools, sign up for Webmaster Tools, make sure Bing's not giving me any warnings or any errors, and otherwise I don't do anything specific for Bing. I don't think you have to. I think the things that work for Google will work for Bing. Just pay attention and make sure you're not getting any errors reported by Bing.
So Barry says it looks like maybe his site might have got hit by some bad backlinks, and he's looking at going through and removing these. Should he pay somebody to do this, or like how would you suggest going about doing it himself if he didn't want to pay somebody to go through and remove bad backlinks?
Yeah, it's kind of a weird industry, right? 5 years ago, people were paying people to get links, and now we're paying those same people to remove links, and often fairly expensive. There's a couple of tools, I can't name them off the top of my head. I could probably let you know, Bob, and you can send an email out that seem like they do a good job. I haven't used them because I haven't had to do it. You probably would have gotten a warning if you specifically got a message from Google about bad links. Then you do have to do some cleaning up and disavow. And Google has even said it makes sense to disavow links if you've never been hit now. Just get rid of some of bad stuff that might be linking to you. I specifically would worry about stuff that, today Google thinks is manipulative, a lot of anchor text optimization. I don't worry as much about the low-quality scraper sites that scrape a lot of sites and then create links based on, because I think Google can find those. But if you've gotten a warning from Google, or if you have links that you're afraid of, then I probably would at least get one of these software tools and do it yourself.
So whoever asked that question, I'm sorry, I've scrolled down now. If you want to shoot me an email to bob@activebrain.com, I'll try to get the info from Mark on what 1 or 2 of those tools that you can use might be. Okay, here's the deal, you guys. I have to let Mark go. He's been very generous with his time. If you guys have a question that has not been answered yet, what I'd like you to do is you can go to our Facebook page, facebook.com/ActiveRain. If you leave that question on the Facebook page, I will try to kind of bring those questions together and get some answers from Mark, or I may have some opinions and some answers for you that I would be willing to share. I think the most important thing to remember here is it's hard work, right? If you want to rank in the search engines, I've always said there's two ways you can do it. You could pay for it, right? You could do advertising on sites like Zillow and Trulia and Realtor.com, and so we know who the big boys in our industry are. Or we can work for it. And Mark mentioned earlier, one of the great ways that you can compete with the Z's and the T's and the R.C's is to really focus hyper-local and to be thinking about and writing about things that you guys are that are kind of unique to where you live and where you do business. So, Mark, man, awesome time, man. I really appreciate getting to pick somebody's brain on these things. Thank you so much for coming on and doing this.
This was great questions, and it was fun. I hope I was helpful.
Yeah, absolutely helpful. Hey, everybody, thank you for joining us to kick off your week. We hope you have an awesome week in real estate. On behalf of Carrie and Alicia, who are always behind the scenes, thank you again to Mark Monroe, the Director of SEO over at Trulia. My name is Bob Stewart. You guys have a great week. Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye.